TK may have started the grave dancing, but I'm just going to keep it going because this will be not the first episode of the podcast. No. Today is what I would call perhaps a preamble to the podcast, because I believe, as I've looked through the vast history of Jim Crockett Promotions at what would become the, I guess, history or beginnings of WCW, I came to a very interesting conclusion. And basically, at the end of the day, the story of Jim Crockett Promotions is also the story of WCW. And that was the initial sort of genesis and idea of what I wanted this podcast to be. I wanted it to quite literally be from Crockett to the chaos that would end up killing WCW, along with that AOL Time Warner merger. And part of that was going back to 1988. And initially I was like, I'm going to watch, the early part of 1988. That will be kind of the little trailer, if you will, for this show. That was going to be the basis of this show. And then I went, well, wait, let's go back a little bit. What was the big catalyst to Jim Crockett selling his company, his family company, for several decades at that point in 1988, to Ted Turner in an act of desperation because he ran out of money? Well, so then it's like, again, follow the money, right? Okay, well, what caused Jim Crockett to plummet so much money into what ended up being nothing? Well, that would be a little bitty promotion from my neck of the woods known as the UWF. The UWF was a promotion formerly known as Mid-South Wrestling. A lot of people that have been around dirt sheets or the internet long enough know exactly what Mid-South Wrestling is. Bill Watts' promotion used to be Leroy McGurk's promotion. Jim Ross started his career there, of course, because it was his home promotion in Oklahoma. Me being from Arkansas, had I been alive back in the early to late 80s, I would have been in their region as well. So this would have been the regional wrestling that I would have watched. And it is heralded as perhaps some of the greatest professional wrestling ever booked. And I think it's very hard to argue that, especially the 81 to 84, 85 era. That's the golden age for Mid-South Wrestling. And the reason for UWF being the second and last name of the promotion is very simple. The WWF happened. And once Vince McMahon, the man we usually don't name, but we'll go ahead and get it out of the way for historical purposes, I will say Vince McMahon for some people that are, upset by that, and rightfully so. The number one thing about this podcast is I do want to be historically accurate. I'm very, that is something that I feel very strongly about just in, life. I think if people knew a little bit more about history, I think we probably would be better off as a society, but I will get off that soapbox immediately. My point being, Bill Watts was not wrong when he thought, I can't just keep promoting as Mid-South Wrestling. People are like, what the fuck? And they were getting national syndication. So it really, again, it's like, we're not just running in fucking Mid-South. They were running shows a lot of different places. And so in that, he said, let's rebrand. And I don't know why, very ahead of their time, to be fair, old Bill Watts. He said, we could be a world entity, a global entity. The GWF exists later. We'll get into that because that kind of ties into WCW many years down the road. The universe spoke to Bill Watts, folks. The universe said, name me. as your savior, your idea savior of this fucking new promotion. So the Universal Wrestling Federation was born, and it died a very quick death because basically, again, you had Jim Crockett Promotions on one end / the NWA, who, you know, they were doing great business, especially in like 86, 87 rolls around now. And the WWF is doing incredible business. They're leading into WrestleMania 3. And it is in that moment in early 1987 that Bill Watts decides, hey, you know what? I'm fucking out of this. We're bleeding money. It doesn't look like we're going to get any major sponsorships going forward. It just seems like it's a 2-horse race here. So he says, you know what, I'm going to sell. And I don't know exactly all the particulars, but I know that the rumor was that Jim Ross was the one that brokered the deal. He called Jim Crockett Promotions, and basically, if I'm not wrong, last I heard, and again, this is all fucking old school wrestling stories, and you'll hear a lot of that in this podcast. And I'll say right now, a lot of it is probably bullshit. But based on what I have in front of me, Jim Ross called Jim Crockett Promotions and basically bluffed him and was like, hey, we're selling, WWF's interested, what do you think? And Jim Crockett, never wanting to miss out, and at this point, so neck deep in a war with Vince McMahon that really, at the end of the day, was wholly basically unnecessary. He said, well, I guess it wasn't. If I think about it, Vince was going to go after him, so I guess they might as well fucking retaliate. But either way, in April of 1987, the UWF was purchased by Jim Crockett Promotions, and what followed was basically, and I hate to fucking blow his spot up here, but a shittier version, but a very similar version to what Tony Khan has done with the Ring of Honor name, which is purchase it, run shows in its name with his own talent, and basically the identity of the UWF, basically slowly died. And unless your name was Big Bubba Rogers or Dr. Death, you weren't part of the UWF. They basically culled Terry Taylor immediately at Starrcade 87, had him do the job to Nikita Koloff. They just absorbed what they could, and it wasn't long until Eddie Gilbert, who was probably the most influential guy in all of UWF, brought in a couple guys named Sting and Rick Steiner, and they ended up really being the biggest positives to the UWF purchase for Jim Crockett Promotions. We all know who Sting is. We all know who Rick Steiner is, especially in modern day, because he is now known as the father of Braun Breaker, the current Intercontinental Champion, but also, you know, a pretty good fucking wrestler. And as I've been watching the 1988 TVs, the dude was very ahead of his time. I mean, you know, shoot wrestling to the core. And so, yeah, outside of that, the UWF was kind of a fart in church when it came to being purchased by Jim Crockett Promotions. But I did want to highlight some guys and go into, I thought it'd be fun, the lineage of the UWF Championship. The UWF Championship began May 30th, 1986, with this man, Bam Bam Terry Gordy, perhaps the most underrated man in the history of the business. Such a great wrestler. If you've never seen Terry Gordy matches, go to YouTube, do yourself a favor. And specifically, UWF stuff / Mid-South. Anything he did with the Freebirds is incredible, but they gave him his due as the first ever UWF champion. He beat Jim Duggan in a tournament final in Houston, and he held that title for 163 days until an injury put him out. And this man, some of you know him as the African Dream, Akeem, but he was the one-man gang, and he was the UWF champion for 161 days until, shout-outs to the Bubba cast, Big Bubba Rogers was the third UWF champion on April 19th, coming up on the anniversary of him winning the UWF championship. So, don't know if there was plans for that conversation coming up on the old Bubba cast, but yeah, that's interesting. I just saw that. Wow. April 19th, 1987, and a very interesting place where he won the championship. Place I know very well, Muskogee, Oklahoma, not too far from where my stomping grounds are. And I am a member of the Muskogee Nation, so that's super cool. Bubba Rogers beating One Man Gang, and I guarantee you that match was hard hitting as fuck, and I guarantee you there was a couple teeth that were loose or missing at the end of that fucking match. But on July 11th of 87, Dr. Death finally does the fucking deed, wins the UWF title. He would be the last champion, and unfortunately, after some BS defenses and being used as just a nothing championship for Jim Crockett, the day after Christmas, 1987, the UWF title officially was defunct. And that leads us to the beginnings of 1988. And like I said, the remnants of UWF were everywhere. You had Sting on the rise. Of course, the zenith of that rise would be Clash of Champions 1, which would go head-to-head with WrestleMania 4. Very good show. We had ridiculousness. I will say this. I loved the build to the 6-man barbed wire rope match with the Road Warriors and Dusty against Ivan Koloff and the Powers of Pain, where Animal had a ridiculous Jason mask because his face was just beaten, folks. It was so beaten badly that he had to have the mask on. And in fact, I do believe that, yes, there it is, the Nightmare Fuel itself, Road Warrior Animal, in the face protector mask during the spring of 1988. And the biggest thing to come out of 1988 so far as we get into my watching, which is around summer, as I get ready for the actual launch of the show, is, of course, the famous angle of the Midnight Rider. And the Midnight Rider was the result of an angle where Tully Blanchard, J.J. Dillon, and Arn Anderson are interrupting Magnum TA, who's cutting a promo about some finish with Barry Windham and Lex Luger. Yes, very convoluted. Where basically what had happened at this house show is he was doing commentary. Of course, the classic, I'm only here doing commentary. I won't get involved. Fucking cost you the tag belts. And that's what happened. They lost the belts to old Luger and fucking Barry Windham at Clash of Champions 1, I believe, was what it was at. Again, this is kind of a blur. I'm fucking watching through it. It was Clash of Champions 1. But, so what happens is they fucking are pissed. They interrupt him, and it was honestly one of the worst ideas ever. They're like, okay, we're gonna have Tully like bullshit punch you, Magnum, and you can't really take a bump, so he's just gonna like caress you down to the floor. So that's basically what happens. But they sell it like he fucking shot him with a fucking rifle. Okay, folks? And so Dusty comes out with the bat that Magnum used that caused all this controversy, and he starts whipping ass. And it's a whirling dervish, and in that dervish, he nails Jim Crockett Jr. And Jim Crockett Jr. takes a bump on the fucking floor. And people are losing their minds, and he's running after him. He's fucking pissed. Well, then they do this whole thing over the last couple weeks before this whole reveal of, we got to discipline Dusty. What are we going to do? And it is decided that he will be suspended for 120 days. Can't compete. And as that occurs, we have this video that begins to play on NWA television.
Let's take a look at the Midnight Rider.
You get the gist, right? We got the fucking Midnight Rider show up, right? And he fucking, he's pissed, man. Magnum's like, hey, he came in, he's here for the fucking, for the fans, everything else, right? The fucking most babyface shit you've ever seen ever, right? And, I have not finished the Midnight Rider arc here, but I will say this. I think that I think that a lot of people have given it shit forever. It's like the classic thing that everyone shits on. And I get it, right? Like it definitely jumped the shark. And this probably was the beginning of it jumping the shark, to be honest. Because they did it back in the day. I want to say it was 84 maybe ish or something. I know, and they had like Yellow Dog and all that. I mean, it's a trope, right? The masked man that looks like the top baby face. That's been done 100 times, even by 88. But you definitely could see that they were kind of like, okay, Vince is heating up over there. We definitely need to figure something out. And this is one of those classic Dusty Rhodes bag of tricks, getting pulled out. And unfortunately, we all know that did not end up working out. And within 6 months of this little angle, they would no longer be Jim Crockett Promotions. They would become WCW, and a lot of things would change. And Dusty would, of course, be a massive part of WCW's entire history, but specifically the history of Ted Turner's purchase because of another angle that he would become a part of down the road. But, of course, we will get to that later. I just wanted to make this, like, the title says, a little bit of a teaser. I didn't want it to be this long thing, but I'm very excited. I'm very excited to get into these TVs. They've been super, super fucking fun to watch. And I'm excited to talk to other people that I know around social media, around wrestling, that remember the days before Nitro. Because everybody focuses on the Nitro era, and I understand it was their zenith. There's no denying that. But I have a soft spot because I began to watch during that era of the days before Nitro. And that's what we're going to talk about on this podcast. And I thank you all for checking out the trailer. The podcast, of course, the first episode debuting April 17th, the day after Spring Breakthrough Dynamite. And I can't wait to have you all there.